If somebody asked me to move, they just drew a line in the sand, and what I know is this. If I don't show up, like everybody knows, you really want to find out who your friends are, move and see who shows up. Because if you don't show, I'm telling you right now, move, and whoever doesn't show up, they were faking it the whole time. They weren't your friends. Your real friends show up. And I know this, right? So everything in me doesn't want to move, but I try to help me move. So, if you can imagine this is how it works. Joe, wherever Joe is, if Joe comes to a group of us friends and Joe's like, hey guys, I'm moving on Saturday, can you come? Immediately all of us are like, oh my gosh, don't make eye contact with Joe. I do not want to help him move, And I'm trying to think like, he's looking at me, think, there's something I'm doing on Saturday. And then one guy raises his hand and say, I'll help you move, Joe. And Joe says, well, then I choose you. Listen, this is how it works. Listen, the call is not the issue. Every single one of you in this room are called. You're all called. Listen, all of you are called. The issue is not the call, it's the response to the call. So, the reason why many are called but few are chosen is because there's just a few that stand up. Jesus comes into a room like this and says, who will separate themselves to an inner room of prayer for revival in your generation? Who will give themselves fully to be a leader in your generation? And immediately everybody's like, oh my gosh, don't make eye contact with Jesus, And then there's a handful of people that stand up and say, Jesus, I'll be a leader in my generation. I'll give myself fully. And Jesus says, then I choose you. The way that you get chosen is you respond. Many are called, few are chosen, because there's only a few that are willing to separate themselves fully to the cause of Christ in the earth and raise their hand and say, Jesus, I will be a leader in my generation. And there's a reason, listen, there's a reason why people don't say yes. And listen, you can get to heaven. You can be saved. Jesus can be your Savior, and you can still be avoiding eye contact with Him, not wanting to raise your hand when He asks, will you give yourself fully to see your generation awakened? And there's a reason, because following Jesus is the most hardcore thing you will ever do with your life, ever. I mean, if you really study the life of Jesus, He was constantly making it easy to leave and hard to stay. All the time. He'd gather 15,000 on a hillside. Signs and wonders, multiplying food. And then he'd get up and say the most offensive thing you could say to a Jewish culture. He'd get up and say, listen, if you want to have a part of me, you have to drink my blood and eat my flesh. And he wouldn't explain it. He wasn't like, hey, people, this is symbolic. It's an allegorical conversation. It's like, I don't really mean my physical blood and my physical flesh. I mean, grape juice and saltine crackers. Like he